of living has risen enormously across the world, and Israel is sadly no exception. Today, the average monthly salary for an employee in Israel is about $3,500. That is up 6.1% from January of 2022, which sounds good, but the stats show that after taking into account inflation, the average salary has only really risen by 0.7% over the past year. Well, now the government has decided to raise the minimum wage to help combat the ever-increasing prices, but it certainly does not seem to be enough. And joining us now to break it all down is our economic analyst and I-24 News host, Ariel Margalith. So, Ariel, let's break down the minimum wage in Israel, the hour-by-hour salary, and how it compares.
You know, Natasha, in an ideal situation, the minimum wage would be a wage that would suffice for living, right,
yes.
in the country. Yes. That includes, of course, boarding, housing, food, education, transportation, etc. That is definitely not the case in Israel. Now, the minimum wage was just increased in the 1st of April 2023 from 5,300 shekels to 5,572 shekels. That's an increase per hour of about a shekel per hour. Now the average, the minimum wage is 30.61 new Israeli shekels per hour. But it's very interesting to see this data, and anybody who lives in Israel knows that nobody really can live with a minimum wage of such in Israel.
That is relevant to the cost of living in this country.
And that's because,
and if you have kids, don't even get me started.
And that's because it's calculated as a percentage of what you mentioned, which is the average salary in the market. How is the average salary in the Israeli economy calculated? It's calculated by a mean and not by a median, of course. And because we actually have two economies here, and you mentioned the OECD report that came out yesterday, it also mentions how divided Israel's economy is between the high-tech salaries, those who make an average salary of 35,000 shekels per month, and those who make far less, the lower echelons of society who make very little. And these are really two economies that are living here side by side.
Right, so when you're looking at that medium, like you said, I mean, the average salary is driven up 12,000. Yeah. Being the average salary across the board in Israel doesn't seem to make sense to me either. That seems very high.
It doesn't.
Compared to what I know about the salaries of people living in this country. So it is at 35,000 or 28,000, I think it was updated to now as the average salary for somebody in a high tech today.
Yeah,
it is that up.
It was updated because there's a little bit of a recession and prices were lowered. Now take a look at the minimum wage in Israel. We just mentioned 5,772 shekels versus the actual living wage that is necessary in order to live in Israel. And these are this is information that came from the Fair Trade Organization here in Israel. They did a survey that was published in February, and we can see that there is a gap of almost 30% between the minimum wage and what's necessary for a living wage, calculated by how much a person needs to earn in order to be living modestly, Natasha, modestly, and it's calculated by the needs of the lowest 25% of society here in Israel. So we're not talking about extremely high standards of living or education or food, etc. Food, for example, is calculated by 2,100 calories per day per capita. Living, housing is calculated by, as I mentioned, the lowest 25% in Israel, as long as it's not a poor neighborhood, what's called like a dangerous, poor neighborhood. So this is the data in Israel, definitely very concerning, that gap of almost 30%.
Right, and that brings me to my next question, is how this compares to other countries, other OECD countries around the world.
Yeah, so I think, we're very much busy in comparing ourselves to other places around the world. There are places where the situation is much better. For example, Spain, New Zealand. In New Zealand, you can even save money. In Spain as well, but just a little bit. In the UK, the situation is also not as great, not as bad as Israel, not 28%, but the gap between the minimum wage and the living wage is around 18%. So Israel is not alone in this. In many places around the world, the minimum wage is not enough to suffice a normal, decent living, even in low income sort of sector of society.
Right.
But Israel is very much high up there, and you can see the 28%, almost 30%. That's a lot, and of course the cost of living continues to rise here in Israel.